I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents. Who is walking with God? The story behind this and other remarkable photographs.
Sometimes your calling may take you places you never imagined. We'll hear from a director whose film examines that.
I started filming them in Tampa. The priest who founded the community, however, Father Philip Scott, is a native Peruvian. And prior to my documenting them, they were already beginning a conversation about going back to his home country.
And is it another mystery of the church? We go to a cathedral to check out some Hitchcock.
Don't tell them, as long as you are a priest. Can you?
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this summer has had its share of blockbuster movies, hasn't it? Like, say, Toy Story 3, for example. Also, Inception, another big one at the box office. And both of those you can actually still catch in the theaters right now. Well, tonight we are focusing on film and photography, beginning with some remarkable still life.
Over the centuries, Jesus has been depicted many different ways, but you've probably never seen him quite like this. These are just some of the startling, moving, and provocative images taken by fashion photographer Michael Belk. His work has appeared in Vogue, GQ, and Vanity Fair, but he recently took his craft in a very different direction, and it's got a lot of people talking.
And watching as well. His interview has generated over 1,600 views over on our website. This is due in large part, I'm sure, to his unique take on the Gospels, especially the parables of Jesus. I had a chance to speak with Belk by phone to learn more about the inspiration behind these pictures and their meaning. All right, Mr. Belk, thank you so much for joining us today on Currents. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, these are really some beautiful photographs. I've seen several of them, and they are just beautiful. Why don't you give me a little bit of a history about yourself and what led you to, or what inspired you to do this series of photographs?
Well, I've been a fashion photographer for 30 years. Not only been a photographer, but designed and produced fashion advertising for a lot of the names that you would recognize in the industry. And about probably halfway into my career, I started asking the question, why me? Why did I get to have such a great job that, took me around the world and really let me have a lot of fun making a good living?
Right.
And I started recognizing that I probably had something I needed to give back. Several years ago, probably 3 years ago, was when I got this idea of taking my time and talents and using them to take the messages of Jesus Christ from 2,000 years ago and make them relevant to today. And
right.
That's how this came about.
Have you gotten any feedback of saying, well, maybe I don't like this so much, seeing Jesus standing beside a sports car or something like that?
Anytime you do something like this, any type of art collection like this, but especially one that has to deal with the subject of Jesus Christ, you're going to get some blowback. Fortunately, ours has been minimum. In fact, it's been the opposite. People have absolutely loved what they've seen. I've gotten emails from all around the world just thanking me for doing this and being blessed for the images and how real it makes Jesus and how it connects him to what's going on in their lives today.
First of all, there's one of Jesus actually walking down a road with a Nazi. Describe that, kind of explain that to us and the meaning behind that.
Well, let me preempt that by saying that all of the images began with messages. What I wanted to share on that image was forgiveness. And I didn't necessarily want to come up with an image that was going to be radical or invasive in anybody's life, but that was the image that came to my mind. What would be more difficult to forgive than Jewish people forgiving the Nazis for the Holocaust?
Right. Well, what about the one which I actually particularly like? It's of Jesus standing to the side of the cross, and the cross actually has a neon vacancy sign on it.
I have to tell you, I really love that image. Where the idea came from, it has to only be divine, because I don't think I could think up something like that.
Right.
But the whole idea is when you think back to the beginning of Jesus' life, his birth, and the story of Mary and Joseph, you recall there was no room in the inn.
Right.
But 33 years later, there seemed to be plenty of room for him on the cross. In fact, they were opening doors for him to hang on the cross. And so, to me, the cross represents, that there's a vacancy for all of us, that we all have a place there in learning how to die to our own self-needs and live for other people's needs, and learn to die to the darkness of this world and open our eyes to the light of Jesus' world.
Right. Now, one more I wanted to ask you about was there was one where Jesus is kind of standing alongside a sports car. That one I think maybe needs a little bit of explanation, at least on my part. I was kind of looking at it, a little scratching my head a little bit.
Well, it's the rich young ruler.
There you go.
As you recall, the rich young ruler was very interested in Jesus' message about eternal life.
Right.
And he asked Jesus, what do I have to do to get this? And Jesus said, follow the commandments. And he says, I do that. What else do I need to do? And Jesus knew what his issue was. It was his money, and it was his lifestyle. And so he said, give it all up. Give it all up. Then follow me. And so here is a modern-day rich young man who has a Ferrari. After all, we were shooting in Italy. You had to have a Ferrari,
Yeah, of course.
And he's got a beautiful girl sitting in there who's dressed in Armani. Right. And we wanted to set up a situation of, I really want to go with you, Christ, but, I really like this lifestyle as well. And so the message there is for all of us to look at our lives and ask ourselves, what's holding us back from anything in life, but especially from that relationship with Christ?
Well, definitely some very powerful imagery there. Now, what effect are you hoping that these images have on people?
I believe that my mission is the same for everybody that's at the end of the Gospels. Go tell the story. Use all of your God-given talents in every way you can to just go share the story. It doesn't necessarily say we have to go sell the people or that we have to beat them into submission. It just says go tell. Right. And so I'm taking my talents and doing the best I can to go tell the story of Jesus Christ in hopes that it's going to ignite in people who have never known anything about Christ a passion to go know more of him, or for people who are sitting in the pews every week and not really following him to be reignited to say, I need to know more about this man.
Well, Michael Belk, thank you so much for being here and joining us today over the phone. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being on Currents.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Photographer Michael Belk there, and if you'd like to find out more about his work and this particular project as well, just go over to our blog. It's currentsny.net. That's the website. You go there and click Riding the Wave.
But stay tuned. There's much more current straight ahead. When we return, we'll have the day's headlines, including same-sex marriage is on hold again in California. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, what do you get when you combine Alfred Hitchcock and Catholic theology? We'll find out.
But first, let's check the day's headlines. Same-sex weddings are on hold again in California after an appeals court ruling Monday. The judges of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals say they need to hear broader questions over the constitutionality of such marriages before ceremonies can resume. The brief order supersedes a lower court ruling earlier this month that would have permitted same-sex couples to marry as early as Wednesday. California Attorney General Jerry Brown says the higher court still needs time to make up its mind.
I'm not alarmed because I'm not surprised. This is a big decision. I don't think there's anything like it anywhere in the country. So when you break new ground, plaintiffs and parties have to expect that the higher court will keep things status quo until they've had a chance to hear the arguments and render their own opinion.
The appeals court will begin hearing arguments in December. Meantime, the Supreme Court of Mexico voted Monday to uphold a Mexico City law allowing homosexual adoption. In the 9-2 decision, justices ruled against opponents who said the law failed to guarantee children a traditional family or protect them against discrimination. In recent weeks, the court ruled same-sex marriages performed in Mexico City are constitutional and that those marriages must be recognized all across Mexico. Catholic news agency reports San Cristobal Bishop Felipe Arizmendi said the court likely acted according to the letter of the law, but certainly not according to justice. New York Governor David Paterson will meet with developers of a proposed Islamic community center and mosque near Ground Zero. The date and purpose for the meeting have not been announced, but last week Paterson offered to help the controversial development find a new location. Critics say the Cordoba House site is too close to the former World Trade Center. But as we're about to see, religious confrontation is not just happening here in New York. CNN's Atika Schubert is in Spain to tell us about competing claims to what's considered a masterpiece of Islamic architecture that functions as a Catholic cathedral.
There are two things most visitors to Cordoba come for: flamenco and this. The graceful arches of Cordoba's Grand Mosque. Both are legacies of Islamic rule in Spain for hundreds of years. But there is no call to prayer here, only the ringing of church bells. Because Cordoba's mosque is actually a working Catholic cathedral performing a daily mass. And it's been a cathedral since Spain's Christian monarchy conquered Cordoba in the 13th century. But the site remains significant for Muslims as a symbol of Islam's golden age. Now, this may be a living piece of history, but the controversy is still very much here in the present. Just a few months ago, in April, more than 100 Muslim visitors came through these doors, unrolled their prayer mats, and began to pray inside. That led to a violent altercation, and 2 people were arrested. Protests have been growing in some Muslim communities for the right to pray here, but can it be both mosque and cathedral? Cordoba's bishop says no. Some things you can't share, he says. You can attend to your friend, love him, and be ready to help him, but there are some very intimate things you don't share. The day that we allow them to use the cathedral, even a little corner of it, is the day they will say that all the cathedral is theirs, he says. But Mansour Escudero, a Spanish convert to Islam, says not only is it possible, it has already been done.
They pretend that we are trying to conquer again the mosque. There is not that intention at all. It will be a symbol of understanding among all the believers.
Spain has more than 1 million Muslims, little more than 2% of the population, and most of that growth comes from migration from countries such as Morocco, but it also has a significant community of Muslim converts inspired by Spain's Islamic history. More than 1 million visitors flock to Cordoba every year, but tourists seem unaware of the controversy. So could something as groundbreaking as a working mosque and cathedral draw more visitors? It's a chance, perhaps, for Cordoba to make history once again.
Well, that is CNN's Atika Schubert in Cordoba, Spain. Meantime, Muslims around the world continue to mark the month of Ramadan with fasting during the daylight hours. In the largely Arab community of Dearborn, Michigan, that presents a problem for high school football practice, but the coach at Fordson High School came up with a way around that.
For Muslims, this is the holy month of Ramadan. We just finished breaking our fast, and we're getting out here on the field. We'll be out on the field about 11 o'clock.
It's like Friday nights right now, under the lights here, and that's why we're so excited to be out here.
As soon as we get on the line, as soon as we start, let's go.
The majority are Muslim kids. What we do at this time is we're fasting from sunrise to sundown.
Ready, break down! Break down! Break down!
Coach Walks came up to me and he's like, Rabia, what do you think? We might be practicing around 11 o'clock till 6 in the morning.
And I thought it was going to be not a smart idea, but it was the best idea he's ever thought of.
Just kind of figured, let's try this. Let's see how it works. Ultimately, this is what we're trying to do. It's for the health and the safety of our student athletes.
Well, I was excited from the get-go to begin with this.
This is beautiful right here, the weather, everything.
Well, the coach says the weather provides another advantage for the players since they're not practicing in the summer afternoon heat. Catholics in Boston are breathing a sigh of relief after a treasured relic stolen from a church has been returned. The relic is believed to be a piece of the cross used during the crucifixion of Jesus. A circular brass case which holds the artifact also features a wax seal stamped by the Pope's ring. It was stolen from the Cathedral of the Holy Cross several weeks ago. State police in Vermont found the relic while investigating a domestic disturbance in a trailer park.
1,500 victims of flooding in Pakistan now have a roof over their heads thanks to a group of Irish nuns. Heavy rains and flooding have killed 1,600 people and left 2 million homeless. Reports say an order of nuns called the Presentation Sisters have turned one of their schools into a homeless shelter for flood victims. 3 Irish nuns work at the school, which usually serves Christian and Muslim children and teenagers. Now, one of the Presentation Sisters' other schools was destroyed by a terrorist bombing back in 2008. Well, TV networks in Lebanon have canceled a show about Jesus after complaints it was offensive to Christians. The show, called The Messiah, studied Jesus from a Muslim perspective and was carried by networks catering to predominantly Shiite audiences. Reports say Christians complained the show was offensive because Jesus was portrayed as a prophet and not the Savior. Well, back here in this country, legendary actress Zsa Zsa Gabor has taken a turn for the worse. A family spokesman says the 93-year-old refused to have a liver operation, which doctors said would have given her a 50-50 chance of survival. Gabor then returned home to spend her final days there. She had hip replacement surgery last month, but experienced complications. A priest performed the anointing of the sick, commonly referred to as the last rites, for Gabor on Sunday. And finally, even though he died in 1954, famed French artist Henri Matisse will soon have his own room at the Vatican, or at least his artwork will have its own room. We get details now from Rome Reports.
Beginning in December, the Vatican Museums will be displaying the rich languages of color and design as expressed by Matisse. The Vatican Museums will dedicate a special exhibition room featuring the French artist's religious works, donated to the Vatican by Matisse's son in 1980. Although there is still a few months to go before its inauguration, there's great anticipation for the new exhibit.
Well, if you want to get a glimpse at Matisse's work, but you can't quite make the trip to Rome, there is an exhibit of his work right here in New York this summer. It's called Matisse Radical Invention, and it runs through October 11th at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan.
Definitely something to check out. Stay tuned, there's more Currents coming up.
Just ahead, it's been a long journey for this local filmmaker. I'll talk to the director of The Calling.
The Calling is a documentary that follows 3 individuals who are members of a newly forming Catholic religious community called the Family of Jesus Healer.
Welcome back. Well, in an annual end of summer ritual, students are getting ready to head back to school for the fall, and many may be asking themselves, what is my calling?
Well, as we continue now our look at pictures, we move on to the moving kind of pictures now. A documentary that looks at people and their callings. It's entitled appropriately enough, The Calling.
The film looks at how one group of Catholics lives its call or vocation in Peru. The documentary has generated a lot of excitement and praise from all along the festival circuit. It recently played at the Rhode Island International Film Festival and was also nominated for Best Documentary at this year's Staten Island Film Festival.
A lot of praise indeed. I had a chance to sit down with the award-winning director of The Calling, David Rangeli. David, thanks so much for being here today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Well, this is a film that has been very successful so far in the film festival circuit. It's something that's been reaching a lot of people so far as well. Tell our viewers, those who might not know about it, who might not have heard anything about The Calling, what it's about.
The Calling is a documentary that follows 3 individuals who are members of a newly forming Catholic religious community called the Family of Jesus Healer. And it documents in a very personal and intimate way their embracing of Catholic religious life. It shows the ways in which this decision or this call to follow Christ is changing them, but it also goes beyond their personal experiences and incorporates what is happening with their families as well, in terms of how the families are responding to how this particular individual is embracing the faith in this very intimate, personal way.
Okay, well, very good. Now, this takes place in Peru, I believe, right?
Well, the community was originally founded in the Diocese of St. Petersburg, and when I started documenting them, it was December of 2002, a long, long time ago, I started filming them in Tampa.
Right.
At the time, they were working in Ybor City, which is a northern sort of section of Tampa, which has a lot of, poverty, a lot of drug addiction, a lot of alcohol, a lot of children at risk. And they were doing a lot of wonderful work in this very poor community, helping these populations. And for the most part, I felt when I started documenting them that the film was going to take place in and around this area.
Right.
The priest who founded the community, however, Father Philip Scott, is a native Peruvian. And prior to my documenting them, they were already beginning a conversation about going back to his home country to help the poor there. So that began the process of the film taking place in two settings, if you will. Right. Tampa, Florida, and then Lima, Peru.
Gotcha. And Peru being a very, I don't want to say desolate, but I guess this is kind of desolate setting for this. I mean,
yeah.
it is, especially from what I've seen, and as I've told you before, I haven't been able to see the entire film. I've listened to a couple of the interviews that you've done. I've also seen the trailer and read some about the film as well. From what I can see there, it is just a very, very poor area where they're ministering now. Yeah,
I mean, there are areas of Peru, and by and large where I was Lima, which is the capital, and then, about 20 or 30 minutes outside of Lima where this community had their mission house and where they were working with the poor. There are areas that are very beautiful. There are areas that are very beautiful that were literally a stone's throw away from this community called El Vallecito, where the family of Jesus Healer was ministering to the poor. The contrast between rich and poor, I discovered when I was in Peru, is very close. In some ways. And the desolation that exists in places like Vallecito is partly due because of the socio-political system, but it's also due to climate. I mean, the climate in this area of Peru changed drastically 150, 200 years ago, and it became very arid. Water is a major, major concern in places like this, as you could probably see from the footage, because there's literally no greenery. Yeah. And when I first went to El Vallecito and the community took me there, it was like a lunar landscape to me, and the first words out of my mouth were, "My God," because I couldn't imagine how people could live in a place like this. Growing up in a place like New York City, in and around the city, you have, the Catskill Mountains, you have the ocean, you have all this beauty and abundance around you. To see people living in an area where there was literally nothing, it throws one back.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Obviously, they had a lot to deal with in a place like El Vallecito. And over the course of the film, we see how they develop strategies to try and help those who are in need in this area of Peru.
Right. Well, we'll save the rest of our conversation for next time. We'll talk a lot more about the film. We'll talk a little bit more about your inspiration for it.
Yes.
And about vocations in general and people sort of discerning their callings as well. David, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And it's just breathtaking in a way you don't normally use that term. When you see the landscape there in Peru and in the outskirts there, I think El Vallecito is where he said they were ministering. And it's just so desolate, and the people, they need that outstretched hand to kind of help them along in so many ways.
And I find it so fascinating that it's not just the work that's being done, but it's documenting the work that's being done through this documentary that is enabling them to then share their story, so that we can bring more attention to the plight of the folks down there.
Absolutely, and you can actually see there's much more about it over on our website. You can check out part 2 of my interview with David Rangeli. It's there on the website at currentsny.net.
But stay with us, there's much more Currents still to come. When we return, can an Alfred Hitchcock film hold answers to some tough faith questions? We'll find out.
So Father Logan, could have he gone to confession to another priest and telling him the confession that he heard?
He couldn't betray Keller in any way.
Finally tonight, priests, believe it or not, are no strangers to the big screen. There's the fictionalized account of real-life priest Father Flanagan in the movie Boys Town. There's also Carl Malden's Father Barry from the classic On the Waterfront. And then there's Father Logan, the protagonist of Alfred Hitchcock's I Confess.
I Confess tells the story of a priest who was told of a crime during confession, but because he's bound by the seal of confession, cannot reveal what he knows. This spring, during a very difficult time where there were widespread media reports about abuse in the Catholic Church, the young adult group at St. Patrick's Cathedral held a screening of the film classic, and they discussed it and its larger meaning for the priesthood.
Tonight, we're showing an Alfred Hitchcock classic called I Confess. The movie is about a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, who heard the confession of a murderer.
As the film develops, evidence begins to point toward the priest that the priest may be the murderer. And of course, the priest is bound by the seal of confession, so he can't do anything at all that would in any way indicate that he knows who the murderer is. So it's quite dramatic.
I have killed Mr. Villette.
The movie we're watching this evening is a wonderful film, I think, because it's an example of what Pope John Paul II referred to as a fruitful alliance between art and the gospel. Mercy, forgiveness, sacrifice, unconditional love. We see all of that in the main character. So the event this evening, I'm going to show the movie, and then after showing the movie, I'm going to point out a few of the recurring themes in the movie, and then open up the floor for a discussion.
So Father Logan, could have he gone to confession to another priest and telling him the confession that he heard?
He couldn't betray Keller in any way. As soon as exceptions start being made, the sanctity of this sacrament is compromised. It's part of the burden that priests carry as confessors.
So what are you going to do when they arrest you? Perhaps you will point your finger at me. Perhaps you will say it's Keller. That's what you will do, is it? You can't tell them as long as you are a priest. Can you?
The reason why we're showing this film is that it's important for us today because, you know, the Holy Father and the priesthood is under attack because of the sex abuse scandals that have come up in recent news.
The film as a film has tremendous respect for the priest, but within the film, there are a number of people who very quickly turn against the priest. So there's something like a crucifixion at the end of the film where the crowds are actually going to physically attack the priest because they think he did this. I'm sure there are many, many people today who are angry at priests because they hear these stories about sexual abuse. But I suspect, everything I know about it, most Catholics are able to distinguish between a small minority who did some terrible things and the vast majority of priests who I think most Catholics still view as very dedicated men giving their lives to serve God. So I don't think we can make a simple characterization of audiences today. But I really do believe this film would speak powerfully to people today.
Hitchcock's so ahead of his time. They're so compelling. And my mom says that all the time. She's just like, you know, we have to remember that there are so many good priests out there that doing such good work. You know, keep that in mind and keep everything in perspective.
Right, right. And it's a nice look back in this particular context to kind of bring it into today as the priest in the piece was talking about. And then, yeah, you do get to see, as you were alluding to at the beginning, how good Hitchcock was at what he did and how innovative he was. And it's just so, it's moving and it's powerful and it is relevant. Well, that's it for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, we'll find out what's next for same-sex marriage in California, what it may mean for the rest of the country.
Until then, be sure to check us out online at currentsny.net. You can also check us out on Facebook and on Twitter as well. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.